Hey guys, how's it going? Danconia. Welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Playoffs Week 2 results. So finally we are here. We have whittled down 20 teams all the way to 4. And we know our 4 teams will be going through to the Overwatch League Grand Finals 2020 to be held in Korea at the start of October. It's going to be super interesting, but we've got some results to go through in order to find our final 4. And we start off in North America, where we had some of the losers bracket action to start us off with and get through. So we started off with the Atlanta Reign taking on the Florida Mayhem. This was an interesting one because I wanted to know if Atlanta Reign could propel themselves forward and compete with a team like Florida Mayhem. Florida Mayhem, remember, are the 4th seed in North America. So they're one of the top seeds in that region. Atlanta Reign, they've gone on a little run of form, but haven't been this season known to be able to compete with the top teams. And it showed again here with a Florida Mayhem win coming through here 3-0. Florida Mayhem, I think they were, if you compare each role from the Atlanta Reign and the Florida Mayhem, I think like for like, the Florida Mayhem come out on top in terms of quality. I think that was pretty obvious here. Florida Mayhem's coordination was also very good. It was a favourable matchup because there wasn't a lot of Roadhog Zarya or Roadhog Diva. It was very much dive based, and Florida Mayhem are very, very comfortable on that dive. Fate Winston and Gargoyle Diva right now, it's what they are wanting to play a lot. And so they're getting a lot of success with it against teams that wish to mirror that. So I'm not too surprised that this is a 3-0 victory for Florida Mayhem. They moved on to the next bracket. This is the end of the Atlanta Reign run in the playoffs. I don't think it's too bad a result for the Reign. If you look at the start of the season, you would have expected them to do much, much better than they have. But considering their placing in the overall season and where they ended up, I think this is a good result in the end for Atlanta Reign in terms of their final placing. And it still puts them in the top half, or the top half better teams in the league. They ended up staying much longer than Paris Eternal and people like that who were placed above them. So I think this is a good result for the Atlanta Reign as an overall look at the playoffs. Again, it could have been better. Obviously, making this closer and getting a win over the Florida Mayhem would have been very, very good for the Reign. But it's not the end of the world, and I think a few more additions in the off-season and the Reign could be one to watch out for in 2021. But now we move on to our other losers bracket match. This was the Washington Justice taking on the Los Angeles Valiant. The Los Angeles Valiant had just come off a nasty loss against the Philadelphia Fusion. Washington Justice were coming into this after beating the Paris Eternals 3-0 in a quite surprising result for a lot of people. Paris Eternal being that number 3 seed and out of the tournament at this point. So Washington Justice, they are the big, well, not the big boys, that's the wrong word. The surprise boys of the playoffs, aren't they? Decay on the Zarya, Jano on the Roadhog. They have been running wild, getting surprising victories against a lot of teams, running all the way from the very bottom seed of this tournament right now. And they got a very, very close loss against the San Francisco Shock, which they easily could have won, and they could have still been in the winner's bracket. So Washington Justice are a very good team right now in this meta. And Los Angeles Valiant, this match is a weird one because Los Angeles Valiant started off as if they had the answer. This is what we're going to do. We're going to shut the Justice down. They're not going to get what they want to do. And we're going to stop them playing. And we're going to get the win. But as the match moved through, as we got more maps, the Justice sort of learned how the Valiant were working and started to counter the Valiant, and the Valiant were seeing less and less success with what they were running. And the Valiant then ran out of answers. This ends up as a 3-1 victory for the Washington Justice. This moved the Washington Justice on to that losers bracket round 3, where they would face the Florida Mayhem. But we're going to give North America a little break for now as we move over to the APAC region, where we saw the losers bracket kick us off on the Saturday. This was the New York Excelsior taking on the Guangzhou Charge. New York Excelsior had just come off the loss against the Shanghai Dragons. I don't think anyone else really expected that to go much differently than the 3-1 victory that we saw for the Shanghai Dragons, but New York did give a good account of themselves. However, the Guangzhou Charge had just gone up against the Seoul Dynasty last week in the semi-finals of the playoffs and got pasted. There is no way to beat around the bush around this. Guangzhou Charge got completely outplayed by the Seoul Dynasty, and it was quite obvious. And again, it happens here. The Guangzhou Charge did not look like a number 2 seed team. The meta really doesn't favour them. It really doesn't favour them whatsoever. We saw good glimpses from Nero, I'm not going to lie. But apart from that, New York Excelsior were better in all respects. This is a 3-0 win for the New York Excelsior, getting themselves the first win in that losers bracket. And it's well deserved. Well deserved. By far the better team, and New York Excelsior would move on to the losers bracket final. But we had to find out who they were going to take on, which means we had to have the winners bracket final of the APAC region, which was the match of the weekend. It was Seoul Dynasty taking on the Shanghai Dragons. Rematch of the May Melee final we saw all those months ago. Remember that one where Seoul Dynasty were 3-0 up and ended up losing 4-3 in a reverse sweep of 7 map proportions, which we'd never seen the likes of before. And guess what? This match lives up to the hype. There is no surprise about that. Seoul Dynasty getting a fairly nice victory on Busan in the first map, putting them up 1-0. Then a tight King's Row brings Shanghai back to 1-1. Then Seoul Dynasty take a 2-1 lead on Hanamura. Then Havana comes in and Shanghai Dragons take the lead back. At this point, no one had broken serve. Everyone had won their map picks. We're 2-2. Last map, Lijiang Tower. This was Seoul Dynasty's map pick, but Shanghai Dragons. This is the great thing about the Shanghai Dragons team. This was a clash of styles. Shanghai Dragons wanting to run the dive with the Fearless Winston and the Void Diva. Seoul Dynasty wanting to run the Gesture Roadhog and the Marvel Azaria or Diva or whatever, you know. And it was a very high clash of styles. And it was very back and forth in the early maps. But Shanghai, in their matches, and they've done this all season, they learn and they counter and they get better. And in Lijiang Tower, we actually saw the Fearless Roadhog, which is something we haven't needed to see yet. And they matched Seoul Dynasty. And they take the 2-0 on Lijiang Tower, giving them a 3-2 victory over the Seoul Dynasty. It was an absolutely magnificent match. It was honestly the best match of the weekend in my opinion, and I think if you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. It was an amazing match. Shanghai Dragons are the winners of the APAC playoffs and book their place, the first team to book their place in the grand finals. So that will leave us for APAC for a minute. We'll return to the losers bracket match in a minute as we move back over to North America. Now, on the Saturday, the first match we would see in North America would be the big match between the two winners of the semi-finals in the winners bracket. The winners final, if you would. Philadelphia Fusion taking on the San Francisco Shock 1 and 2. So, this is the match that everyone had been wanting to see. The question is, would it live up to the hype? Well, this is interesting. Philadelphia Fusion have been a team to basically force the dive, much like Shanghai Dragons had been doing in APAC. And Shanghai Dragons found that they couldn't keep doing that in APAC up against the Seoul Dynasty. And I think Philadelphia Fusion have ran into a roadblock here against the San Francisco Shock. San Francisco Shock were a bit more flexible. What worried me about the Philadelphia Fusion in this match was the fact that Hisu, Ivy and Carpe, who all featured in this map, were not as impactful as they had been previously for the Fusion. And Striker, especially for the Shock, looked like he was outdoing them. This ends up as a 3-1 victory for the San Francisco Shock, which I don't think a lot of people would have predicted, considering the Fusion's power going through this playoffs run and during the regular season, whereas Shock have shown some cracks, especially against the Washington Justice. So I think this was a bit of a surprise, and I think it's Philadelphia Fusion perhaps not living up, not playing their best, I don't think. And I think the Shock, have we seen the best of the Shock now though? Is this the peak the Shock can hit? Because if so, then yes, they've booked a place in those grand finals to defend their championship title, but if this is their peak, I don't think they're going to win it. I think they need to be better than this. And we are now getting to the point where we're seeing the highest level of Overwatch we have seen all year. And it's super interesting. And this was a result that I think surprised quite a few people. And I think it's off the back of more value out of the DPS of the Shock rather than the Fusion. And it'll be interesting to see how that turns around when we get to the grand finals in October. But we head back over to the APAC region for our final match of APAC this season. Yeah, final match of APAC this season. Isn't it crazy? Seoul Dynasty taking on the New York Excelsior, the losers bracket final. And Seoul Dynasty had been fantastic in this playoff run in APAC, even up against the Shanghai Dragons, which they eventually lost 3-2. They still looked great. New York Excelsior, they've looked consistent, they've looked good, but they haven't looked like they've been the best. And this is quite evident here. Seoul Dynasty look like the better team against New York Excelsior. They look like they deserve to take that second spot and go to the Grand Finals for 2020, and that they do. This is a 3-0 win for the Seoul Dynasty. This is not a choke. This is not a choke by the New York Excelsior. This is the meta not favouring them. This is Seoul Dynasty being better. Quite simply, profit was fantastic for the Seoul Dynasty this week. We are seeing the playoff profit return. It's quite obvious now. And this is a team that can cause upsets in those grand finals. That's without a doubt. Especially as it is expected that this patch will stay as well, which Seoul Dynasty are very, very, very powerful on. And we've seen power from the Washington Justice, utilising the Roadhog and the Zarya and utilising that more broadly comp. But I don't think they can live up to what Seoul Dynasty put out in the APAC region. They're two teams much alike that have found power in this meta, and I think Seoul Dynasty are mastering this meta right now. New York Excelsior didn't have an answer for it. I kind of felt sorry for Jonak. His play was actually pretty good during this match, but the rest of New York Excelsior couldn't live up to what the Seoul Dynasty were up to here, and it resulted in the New York Excelsior's playoff run ending there. Third in APAC, basically, and I don't think that's terribly bad. We expected Seoul Dynasty to turn up during these playoffs, and that they have done. Shanghai Dragons are number 1, Seoul Dynasty are number 2, going into the grand finals of the APAC side of that bracket. Then we had one last match in these playoffs. Kind of in the playoffs. I mean, this is technically the end of the playoffs, but this would be the Washington Justice taking on the Philadelphia Fusion, the losers bracket final. Now in North America. Now, I thought if the Philadelphia Fusion lost to the San Francisco Shock, I really did think the Fusion were going to really pace the opponent that they came up against in the losers bracket. If it had been the other way round and San Francisco had lost, then I slightly worried for the San Francisco Shock side. It turned out it was the Fusion facing the Washington Justice in the end. Washington Justice had done extremely well to get to this point. Extremely well. They've exceeded expectations all round. And the only issue is, they are very powerful, as I just said just now, in this Roadhog Zarya meta. Problem is, Philadelphia Fusion have the individual quality to match that. And this is quite obvious in this. And I said this about the Florida Mayhem and Atlanta Reign. When you put 1v1s up against through all of these roles and you put them up against each other, Philadelphia Fusion will match or outplay this Washington Justice roster. And then when you apply the coordination that this Philadelphia Fusion side has compared to the perhaps less coordination that the Washington Justice have, the raw solo quality of people like Decay and Janu and Stitch is not going to be able to carry the Washington Justice to a victory over the Philadelphia Fusion. It's quite obvious here. The Philadelphia Fusion get a hefty 3-0 victory to finish out our playoffs and book themselves a place alongside the San Francisco Shock in the grand finals. So I am not surprised. I think the Philadelphia Fusion are a better team than the Washington Justice. The Decay story, the Washington Justice story ends here. They technically finish as 3rd place in North America, which is a massive result for a roster that started off as the 12th seed. 12th seed. They secured $250,000 in prize money for that. This is a massive boon for this Washington Justice side, and that is money that can be reinvested into the squad if used properly. We could be looking at a Washington Justice next year that could be one of the best teams in this league if they make the right moves in the offseason. This has been a massive playoff run for the Washington Justice, and it could have big repercussions on their 2021 campaign. But that is the end of the playoffs. It has been some crazy Overwatch we've seen. Definitely go and watch that Seoul Dynasty Shanghai Dragons game. I think that's the best match of this weekend. But we have a Final Four. From APAC, we will see the Shanghai Dragons and the Seoul Dynasty. From North America, we will see the San Francisco Shock and Philadelphia Fusion. These matches will start on October the 8th. They will be played in Korea on patch 1.51.1.1, which is still the Roadhog patch. This is where the big money is given out, $1.5 million for the first place team. We will do an extensive preview of this going into it. It is going to be amazing. The first matches will be the semi-finals, where we see the San Francisco Shock going up against the Seoul Dynasty and the Shanghai Dragons up against the Philadelphia Fusion. These matches are going to be massive. They are going to be close. They are going to be super, super interesting. And these will be the only matches we will see intercontinental, NA versus APAC. We will decide which team is best, and we will decide which region is best as well. It is going to be super interesting. I can't wait for it. October is not that far away. It's going to be in Korea. I believe it's going to be in the OGN Arena as well, which is, I hope it is anyway, and that is going to be beautiful. It is going to be some crazy grand finals. It is not the season we expected, but it's going to be super interesting. I'm going to leave it here for this one. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you'd like to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.